How's it going, everybody? My name's Dave Whipple, and you're watching Bush Radical. About a week ago, I put out a video called Off-Grid Living is a Lie. An incendiary title, kind of clickbaity. I totally get it. The reason I put out a video with a controversial title like that is people see cable television shows or they see certain YouTube channels with a lot of equipment, beautiful pieces of property in magnificent settings and disposable income. And I get questions all the time on my channel from folks that say, hey, what about these folks and these folks? How in the world do they end up with all this stuff? How do they have so much money? There's really no transparency. It's just kind of like, boom, here we are. We have all this amazing stuff and this amazing lifestyle. And people who are interested in off-grid living, they want to know these things. That's the reason why I made that video showing our story. So everything was out there because we come from a very different perspective about off-grid living. A lot of people out there look at off-grid living as this destination. I want to be disconnected from the grid. I want to be more self-reliant. And that's all fine and good. That's totally legitimate. But with Brooke and I, it was always off-grid living was kind of a means to an end. We always saw it as if we're willing to work around power and sewer and water and figure out alternative systems to power, sewer, and water, we can look at properties that are beyond the power grid. You know, stuff that's farther out in the country that doesn't have power lines, or maybe up on top of a mountain that you're not going to be able to drill a well. So long as you are willing to work around power, sewer, and water, and it kind of opens up your options. The world is kind of opened up to you. So for Brooke and I, that was kind of the angle that we're coming from. It's a lifestyle that fit us because we were looking for affordable living and getting a foothold in life. And that's really where my heart's at. That's why I made that video. So many people out there are looking for a fresh start or they're looking for a start in life. And you either have a 30-year mortgage or you can buy a really cheap piece of property, do all the work up front, and then you don't have 30 years of servitude. That's how we got into alternative living. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are really attracted to that idea, being able to have a larger piece of ground that's more private, that's in a better setting, and not being on the hook for 30 years of slavery to the bank to get all of what they want out of their living situation with sweat equity. Honestly, my channel is not so much an off-grid channel as it is a sweat equity channel. So I got a lot of great comments on that video, but I also got a lot of hate mail. And I think people got their wires crossed. A lot of folks are subscribed to all kinds of off-grid channels. If they started to maybe feel like I was disrespecting their favorite off-grid channels, people got a little bent out of shape. And that's not my intention. All I really want is transparency so that people who are interested in trying something different with their lives and getting farther ahead with sweat equity and off-grid living, so they have clear examples to follow that aren't full of omissions, right? So let me dive into the comments here and kind of flesh the whole thing out to give you guys a much better idea of what that video was all about and why I think it's probably one of the more important videos I've done. Stay tuned. Wayne Rogers Outdoors writes, so you're basically just gatekeeping off-grid, criticizing others who don't do it the way you do. That's absolutely not the case. I don't care if you're on-grid or you're off-grid. Coming from our background, we look at it much more like this is a way to kind of circumvent the system and stay out of the mortgage game. By looking at pieces of property that are marginal or more remote or beyond the power lines, it kind of opens the world up to you. You have a lot more options. And if you're willing to camp and then build a little tiny cabin, then build yourself a house, 3 years down the road, you have everything anybody else wants, but you can be completely debt-free. And that's just going to give you a better life. So I don't care how anybody off-grids or if they do or if they don't. It's not where I'm coming from with it. This channel is, like I said, a better way to look at it. It's a sweat equity perspective on off-grid living. Michael Geese writes, and if, I apologize if I got your name wrong. I kind of clipped part of it off when I was screenshotting this comment. Could somebody explain the title? How is off-grid living a lie? And a guy named Chris Trapp wrote back and said, a lot of YouTubers promote living off-grid, but generally they are spending millions of dollars for property, water, power systems that don't set realistic expectations for regular people. Chris, thank you so much for answering that comment for me. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's a really good way to explain that. There's a channel called Zippity Doodah who wrote this comment. You literally claim in your title that off-grid living is a lie, but you don't give the parameters of what qualifies as off-grid living. Perhaps you can give us your definition of what off-grid living is. Be precise. Very good question. I'm happy to answer that. Like I said, off-grid living, in my opinion, is just working around water, sewer, and electricity. I had another comment here that I kind of lost. I don't know where it went to, but it was along the lines of this. I don't think of it as off-grid. I think of it as microsystems. Whoever sent me that comment, I think that's a very, very good way to look at it. You're not really living without water, power, or sewer. What you're doing is you're creating your own microsystems to take care of your needs in those areas. You know, you can have an outhouse, you could have a septic tank with an outhouse over it, pump the septic tank, solar, batteries, wind, LED lights. If you use a propane refrigerator, you're not going to need you could have refrigeration, but you don't have to necessarily have 110 power. A lot of little microsystems. You know, even the Amish aren't completely off-grid. A lot of every Amish that I know, actually, and I grew up in Amish country, they all have these little Honda 5-horse motors, and they'll run old table saws and stuff with a belt off a little gas motor. And a gas motor is essentially an electrically run item. So microsystems is a great way to think of it. Thank you so much for that comment, whoever that was. T-Bird Race Fan writes, I don't see the requirement for being poor to live off-grid. You know, it's not what I'm saying, but I do empathize with people who don't have a lot of money, because from our story, another reason I wanted to show it was we started with nothing and worked into what we have today by working around water, septic, and electric, and starting with really cheap property. You don't have to be poor to live off-grid, but those folks that have a $400,000 house in the burbs and they want to sell the house and they want to move somewhere to be off-grid, to be more self-reliant, that's legit. It's its own thing, but it's not my experience. And the folks that watch my channel see channels like that, and they're like, how in the world are they making this work? When viewers see a lot of money in off-grid videos, it's immediately people want to ask questions. And being that I've always tried to answer as many questions as I can, I guess I'm just, like I said, hypersensitive to it. Some of these channels have amazing things given to them, and then folks see off-grid channels with amazing equipment and expensive whatever, tractors and sawmills and whatever. And then I'm the guy that actually answers comments, and I get to field these comments. How do these people afford it? Personally, I think, and this is just kind of this is my own opinion regarding YouTube. If you're a channel, I would buy anything that you want to deep dive into and review, and then you're just not beholden. You don't have any obligation to. You could be free to say what you actually think. I just think that's a better way to go. Crimson Acres Homestead writes, that was pretty judgmental and arrogant video. I've been watching you for years, and there's no real definition of off-grid. It's relative to each individual, so your idea of what constitutes off-grid isn't any better than any others. I was disappointed. I'm paraphrasing a little here. I can see where you would think that I'm kind of being a snob about the way Brooke and I experienced living off-grid and how we approach it and how we would describe it. The problem I have is omission. People need to be, in my opinion, nobody needs to do anything, but in my opinion, people need to be really upfront about what is actually going on, the minutia behind the scenes, because omissions lead to questions. And if those folks aren't answering those questions, like, how do you afford this? You know, where's your money coming from? How can you get all this? How can you have this amazing Instagram type of lifestyle? And people see those and they can't put two and two together. People can't make the mental jump of how you could get from, you know, moving off grid and then all of a sudden you're living like royalty. So what I told Crimson Acres Homestead was, some off-grid channels mask the idea that living off-grid can be an affordable way to stay out of debt and get a foothold in the world for folks that are starting out. That's my issue. It's the lack of transparency that's disheartening to people who are looking for clarity and answers. A viewer named Number One Pappy writes, I have respect for anyone who goes out and builds their own homestead. I really do. What I don't understand is why there's this running attitude that having running water and electricity is a negative thing. Well, it's definitely not a negative thing. I don't endorse off-grid living, and I don't disparage people from it. We have a house here that we've had for 10 years, old farmhouse. It's got water and sewer and electric. We're here most of the year. We also have a few cabins that are totally off-grid, and when we go up like to Alaska, we have a lot of friends up there. We used to do a lot of business up there, and we're completely off-grid there. We could have power at our log cabin in Alaska. There is power up that mountain, but we just choose not to have it. We don't need that bill 8 months out of the year when we're not there, and we don't really miss having the power when we're there because of microsystems like we talked about before. A little bit of solar, little LED lights for later on in the season, a generator to run power tools. That's basically all we would need. Now, if we were there year-round, we might hook up to the grid. You know, I'm not a zealot or a salesman or an apostle for off-grid living. I see it as a way to get ahead in this world so you don't end up in that trap of debt and a 9-to-5 job that barely pays for the debt. You know what it's like. That's just the story of the world right now. To me, I've always looked at off-grid living as a shortcut. As long as you're willing to sweat and learn and work hard, you can have a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time that might otherwise take you 30 years to pay for. And if you just went out and got a loan from a bank, bank's never going to loan you money to build an off-grid house. The bank might loan you money to build a house, but by the time you're done with like a construction loan, you're going to owe just as much as if you would have probably just bought a house. So I don't think that's the answer for everybody. And the bank's not going to loan you money for swampy land or land that doesn't have anything on it. You know, you're probably going to spend 35 to 50% in a down payment for a bank to finance raw land to you. So if you're just starting out, I like the raw land and build up. The off-grid really makes it doable because you can look at cheaper property that's going to cost less money to get into. And property's always cheaper where there's no power, there's no water, there's no infrastructure. And as long as you're willing to work around that, you can kind of shortcut the process to establishing yourself in, you know, just in life. You know, honestly, I've kind of come to realize myself that I'm a hoarder. I have to admit it. I'm a hoarder. I don't have a house just full of papers and packed up with junk. I'm not that kind of a hoarder. I'm a free time hoarder. I want to hoard as much of my own free time as I possibly can, and I want to hoard as much of my own freedom as I can in the time that I'm here on this earth. So that's kind of the context behind the video I put out a few days ago, why I'm passionate about people seeing the reality of off-grid living, the potential of off-grid living, and maybe more important than anything, the why you would actually go that route and how it would benefit you. Some people assumed that I was picking on their favorite off-grid channel. Honestly, I don't have a problem with any off-grid channel out there so long as they're transparent. So people can see that, well, these people are filthy rich, but they had most of a house paid off that was worth $300,000 when they moved. They had all that money to play with. That's honest. That's right up front. That would at least clear things up so people don't watch those channels and think, how in the world can these folks afford this? Because this is a topic that has to do with people's lives. Honestly, if you want to just be untransparent in another area in YouTube, I could care less. But if somebody's going to sell off their house or if they're going to put part of their life savings into a new venture, I think the transparency needs to be there. That's why when it comes to off-grid, I have a problem with channels that omit where they're getting their money and all their fancy stuff because it drives other folks nuts. They want to know how to make this happen from where they are. That's the problem. You know, I mentioned a helicopter in my previous video. That was actually Homestead Rescue. That's a television show. Marty Rainey is the star of that show. And in the episode I saw, they're trying to drive this load of building supplies across like a 5-foot deep raging river. I mean, and it was hairy. is a really good way to drown, right? And the truck tips. And anyway, they end up solving the problem by helicoptering the building supplies to the site. Ridiculous, right? Now, Marty Rainey's making television, and you got to take television with a grain of salt. And I'm not down on Marty Rainey. He seems like a super nice guy. I think he's just a genuinely good person. It's just not realistic. It might be good entertainment, and it was. It was a pretty interesting episode. But on the other hand, in the real world, nobody gets their 2x4s delivered with a helicopter. And from my perspective, there's always been a financial aspect to it. It's always been a way to get ahead, not a goal to achieve off-grid independence, but a way to not be stuck with 30 years of bills. One of the YouTubers people brought up quite a bit was Sean James. He builds cabins, I build cabins, and he's huge in the space. So there's no way you can't know who the guy is. Sean James is a guy that he's always working with his hands. He's always shooting long-form content. It's obvious that he's doing all the work himself. And I have no problem with Sean James because realistically, he shows people the process of what it looks like to do all these different woodworking projects, building log cabins. And there's really no disconnect as far as how a viewer could get from where a viewer is to where Sean James is. Buy a little piece of property that's remote and start peeling logs. That's basically, you could basically be doing the same thing. There's no giant money disconnect. And as far as the other off-grid channels that were mentioned, honestly, I need to be upfront with you guys. I don't watch off-grid content as a rule. I just mentioned Sean James. I've probably seen 15 minutes of Sean James material in the 7 years he's been out. I just don't watch stuff that's in my field. If I'm building something, I get all the off-grid building that I ever want. I definitely have no appetite to watch other people build cabins in the woods. I subscribe to channels like, I watch Scotty Kilmer, it's an automotive channel. I watch Chris Fix, he's an automotive channel. I think Scotty's a hoot, and Chris Fix does the best work in that space. I watch some motorcycle channels. I watch a lot of stuff from Revzilla, they're pretty good. I watch Fortnite, which is a guy named Ryan Kluftinger up in Canada. Those guys do amazing film work, and they're kind of almost like a Mythbusters for motorcycles and motorcycle products. Really awesome channel. Other than that, I subscribe to my brother's channel and my wife's channel, and we have some friends, 9 to 5 to Life. We know those folks are up in the Upper Peninsula. I subscribe to their channel. But as far as like off-grid homesteading, cabin building content, I never watch a minute of it. So if you're asking me, what do you think of these people? There's a lot of couples off-grid. If you're asking me, what do you think of these people? Or I think these people are awesome and I hate you for disparaging them, or I think these people are fake. Understand that I don't watch any of that stuff. When I do see it, it's because it's brought to my attention. Someone will say, they'll ask me, how did these people end up with this? Or how do you find a piece of land like that? One of the questions I get the most is, how do I find an awesome piece of off-grid land? And I don't think you're ever going to find off-grid land listed as off-grid land. It's just land that's far enough out, you're off the power system. You're not going to have city sewer, that's for darn sure. And you're going to have to figure out your water, your sewer, and your electric yourself. And if you want to look at properties like that, they're always cheaper. They're always more private. They're generally in nice settings. You have your pick of cheap properties if you're willing to travel out far enough. You lose a little bit in the economic angle just from driving back and forth to a property that's farther away from an economic center where you're working. But if you want to know what I think of X, Y, and Z off-grid channel, understand I just don't watch them. And I have no problem with anybody that's transparent, and maybe a better way to say it is proactively transparent. Someone who puts the information out there just plain as day, so everybody can see what's really going on. So when you're watching my channel, the off-grid living content on my channel, basically what you're getting is a view into like the Fairbanks, Alaska dry cabin market, because that's basically where I got my ideas for how and why Brooke and I have built stuff off-grid and our workarounds. That's what it's like up there in Fairbanks. A lot of marginal land. When we built our first cabin, the average good building lot was a $20,000 acre and a half lot. That's a good lot. A marginal lot would be $15,000. And we actually bought a $6,000 piece of land that was obviously had some permafrost on it. You could tell by the trees, you could tell by the soil. But you can work around permafrost. You know, you build a gravel pad, you build a foundation that can be adjustable. So for us, it was like we're kind of funneled into that lifestyle because that's what we could afford, and that's the example we had to look at was everything else in the area. Off-grid living is definitely not a lie. The title was a little clickbaity, but I wanted to grab people's attention. The gist of the comments I got is, you know, who are you to say what's right and what's wrong when it comes to off-grid living? And my running response to that was, I have no issue with high-dollar YouTube channels that have sponsors and get equipment given to them, so long as they don't leave those details out and set unreasonable expectations for people looking for ideas in the off-grid space. That was the entire crux of the conversation. So if you watched my video the other day and you absolutely loved it, thank you so much for the comments. If you watched my video and absolutely hated it, I'm sorry you took it that way. I hope this video clears things up a little. And if you watch this video and you still hate it, you're probably watching the wrong channel. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. My name is Dave Whipple, and you've been watching Bush Radical. And be radical, eh? See you soon.